Welcome. Glad you're all continuing to hang out and listen to the panel here. This is a panel where we're going to be talking about how academia and industry are going to deal with innovation, and particularly what academia can do to provide for the changing needs that are associated with innovation, which is happening very rapidly in our society. We, as faculty, are concerned with making sure that the people coming out of our programs are able to cope with the world as it changes rapidly. So we have three distinguished panelists who are going to do most of the talking, and for my students in the room, this will shock you, but I'm not actually going to do most of the talking. The first panelist I'd like to introduce is Dr. Nicholas Kane. Nick's co-founder and deputy director of Atma Connect, which is an award-winning social impact technology startup. At Atma, Nicholas is leading the development of community-based early warning system that uses local reports to generate disaster alerts and hazard maps. Dr. Kane is also an advisor to, do you pronounce it GISAT? Yeah. GISAT, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. that uses game theory to analyze political decisions. In April, Dr. Kane presented a paper that correctly forecasted that the U.S., under the current regime, would withdraw from the Paris Accords. He has also published 6 peer-reviewed articles on energy infrastructure and the political economy of globalization that use econometrics, geographic information systems, and computational methods. Kind of stuff we do. Oh, that's right, because you're a PhD from CGU. I was going to mention that. Dr. Kane's PhD is in environmental policy and world politics from Claremont Graduate University, and he also has an MPA in environmental science and policy from Columbia University. Our next panelist is Mr. Fred Leichter, and he's a founding director of the Rick and Susan Sontag Center for Collaborative Creativity at the Claremont Colleges, which is also known as The Hive. The Hive provides a place where students can form creative teams, be intellectually daring, and work collaboratively to address complex challenges. It serves the 5 undergraduate Claremont colleges, that's to say Pomona, Scripps, Claremont McKenna, Harvey Mudd, and Pitzer. Prior to this role, Fred spent 25 years at Fidelity Investments in Boston, most recently in the role as Senior Vice President of Design Thinking and Innovation. Fred has also served as the head of user experience design at Fidelity, leading Fidelity's first website in 1996. He is also active in the sport of curling. One of the Canadians speaks up. Okay. Last year, he coached his son's team at the World University Games in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Our third panelist is Mr. Matt Muga. He's the founding and managing director of Muga Consulting Group in San Diego. His group specializes in strategic technology planning, partnering with companies to increase revenue, decrease costs, optimize marketing, and improve operations using a customized approach. He received an MS from Carnegie Mellon in information technology and an MS from the University of San Diego School of Business and Global Leadership. He's currently one of our Jones Fellows at CGU here at CISAT, where he's completing his PhD. 20-year veteran of Qualcomm Incorporated, Matt held executive positions in the areas of engineering operations and project management for over a decade. Prior to that, he was head of international operations for Qualcomm's corporate IT department. His extensive field experience having led complex multi-million-dollar global technology programs in over 34 countries across 6 continents. This goes on to say he's lectured in all kinds of different things at all kinds of different places, and he's led technical and training workshops for a bunch of big companies you'd recognize. He's a longstanding member of Project Management Institute, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, yay, and he currently lectures at San Diego State in information systems in some of the areas that I like to teach, systems development, project management, also technical architecture and global operations. So our panelists came up with a few questions, which we're going to go through. They're going to take turns discussing. After we've been through questions that they came up with, we'll probably address questions from the floor, but we'd be open to people asking questions as we go along, right? Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to these guys, and they have 2 to share, so we'll witness how they how they negotiate the sharing of 2 microphones between 3 panelists.
Hi. All right. First of all, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. So I just want to say that I think the first, just to respond to this prompt, and I think that from hearing the presentations that kicked off this night, that we're all singing on the same hymnal here, and that is to put this prompt up to get students and technologists and people in the corporate world to think about this question is, I think, the first step. Right, because it's easy. I mean, we're not a pure computer science, computer engineering program here, but it's easy when you start working with those people that, the stack and the technology and the Angular plugins and we got a cool new way to do this, and we're gonna minify your site, and we're gonna use the AMP plugins. I mean, that stuff is really important. Atma Connect builds mobile applications. We care about all that stuff. We have a website built in Angular and on and on. But I think that, continuing to think about the problem, Fred and I talked for a few minutes before the panel started, and we're both adherents to the IDEO mantra of human-centered design. So I think just having this prompt, having this question at the start of the technological endeavors we do is just a really great way to get students, to get technologists, to get professionals to think about those issues from that important perspective. So that's a great first step. That's what I would say on that.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for inviting me tonight. It's really great as a newbie to the Claremont colleges. The program that I lead at the Hive at the 5 Cs is all about human-centered design and taking students from diverse programs, diverse backgrounds from the 7 colleges, actually, not just the 5, and putting them together to, as this says, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Just a quick example from my professional background. I grew up in information technology, which is why I feel very comfortable in this room. But when I was at Fidelity, one of the things that I was pushing on, there were lots and lots of people who were interested in what was the technology and how we would deploy technology. And I was always trying to bring us back to what are the needs that our customers have and what are the changing needs. So one of the problems that I spearheaded the work on and what is changing in our environment was around understanding better the needs of an aging population and especially people with aging parents. How many people in this room have aging parents or have had aging parents or are becoming aging parents? All of them. And so you know what those needs are. And so we were really digging in to understand that more deeply and not just say as an investment company, we've got the solution, it's an annuity, or we've got the solution, it's technology. But to dig in deeper and really try to understand the emotional needs that people have and teach our associates and our technologists and our developers to work together to better understand those needs and be more subtle about it. And then I would always ask that question also, well, what alternatives have we tried? How do we know this is a good solution? And what have we tried that is a non-technical solution before we just invest in a technical solution?
I like this particular question because it's one of those things that, the further you are down the technology, the technology road, and the more you consider yourself a technologist, the harder it is for you to kind of break away from that. And one of the things that I always like doing with my teams as well as educating with my clients is really taking a stance of being technology agnostic. And by that, that means that, yes, you might know everything about Salesforce.com. You might know everything about Oracle. You might know everything about the latest and greatest HP servers. But at the same time, if you can't properly articulate to me what it is the business problem is that you're trying to solve, then you really know nothing. And, taking a technology agnostic approach where you are forcing individuals to really focus on the problem. Anytime you get in a room and people start sprouting off things about, different OS this, different mobile client that, basically you just stop them. And, just continue to force the conversation onto the problem. And once you get people in the habit of that, I found it to be it just really, really elevating for the group as a whole. And it's worked well for me.
To the next question. you believe to be the single most important thing academia could be doing in order to continue supporting technology innovation?
I believe this was my question. So, interesting enough, actually, Professor Chatterjee actually already answered this. Is that in my opinion, the single most important thing that academia could be doing is continue to form and develop strong partnerships with the industry. All of us here know that tech is changing just so crazily fast. I mean, just the pace that technology is changing. It's nuts. It's nuts. And of course, the most cutting edge stuff is really still happening out in the industry. Obviously, in academia, with our research, we're doing a number of fantastic things out there. But in order to really stay ahead of the curve and make sure that students are properly trained and ready to go out there and do good things, it has to be a strong partnership with the industry.
Yeah, so my answer to that is that we need to get students to stop believing that they live in a world with right answers. They get into these colleges by circling a lot of the correct answers on a lot of tests and scoring really well at things. And I'm also on the engineering faculty at Harvey Mudd, and we, as a school, give out a lot of problem sets that people are filling out, but they're mostly problems with right answers. And in the world, the real world, the one that we all live in, there are less problems like that than there are problems that are broader. So one of the exercises that we do at the Hive sometimes is I put people into groups and give them jigsaw puzzles to assemble in groups of 4. And you can barely get the words, whoever gets it done first wins out, and if people are on that problem. But a jigsaw puzzle is a very familiar kind of problem for the world of right answers. But then we take them out of that room and bring them into another room where there's scraps of fabric on the floor, and we say, make a quilt. And people pause and they say, of what, how, where? And we said, that's it. And so I would contend there are many more problems that are like the quilt than there are like the jigsaw puzzle. And furthermore, the jigsaw puzzles are getting increasingly automated. And so if we teach people to solve jigsaw puzzles, their jobs will be replaced by automation. And so we need to get people to out of that mindset and realize that they need to experience trial and error and failure and learn about problems that don't have right answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question. I think that actually the CISAT is well ahead of where the social sciences are with this question, because design thinking, iteration, experimentation, to me, these are the best ways to promote innovation. The social sciences, which I love dearly, and I'm a political scientist, through all my education, we're still very much in a deductive mindset. I remember very clearly, I don't think, Brian was on my committee, but he wasn't here for this conversation. A member of my committee who's not here told me that I was, because I was doing some statistical, kind of inductive, deductive stuff, and she upbraided me and said, listen, you cannot be model shopping, right? You cannot be running your regressors through various models, seeing which model fits best. You have to know ahead of time from your theory, right? You have to justify what model is going to work, what your variables are, et cetera, and then run the regression agnostically. Now, I graduated, so I was able to pull that off. But I think, for those of us who are more steeped in technology, I think that the iteration, that's where the magic happens. Because if you could deduce everything from first principles, then, the world would be a lot simpler place, right? We'd be dealing more with clock problems than quilt problems, or as I've also heard them called, cloud problems. So I think in general, across academia, I'd love to see more project-based learning. I'd love to see more iteration, experimentation, and use of transdisciplinary stuff, which of course is all common here. It is challenging, though. As someone who's studied at, a UC, at Columbia, New York, and here, there's still a resistance among many academics to a transdisciplinary lens, because they kind of feel like, hey, this discipline, pick any subfield within a discipline, has so much in it. How are you going to master, say, world politics and your other subfield, public policy in my case, and learn about GIS and bring them all together in a satisfying way. So perhaps there's some automation. I don't know, maybe we can automate some part of that, learn faster and be able to jump together this knowledge in a better way. But I think, you know, from a social perspective, we may be innovating fast enough. So, you know, I think keeping up with industry is a lot of work for us on the academic side.
And I said I wasn't going to say much, but some of the work that we're doing has to do with that. It's the idea that if you restrict your thinking to having one person who's done all the learning and is the one who knows it all, that you're not probably leaving yourself open to sort of distributed knowledge and shared knowledge and shared learning. Technology clearly becomes a factor.
Actually, I just want to echo that. I think one thing, actually, I feel this question very closely related to the first one. So in a sense, I think in the term here, we teach students actually exactly problem solving, right? To really identify problems and try to find different solutions to solve them. I think that problem solving skill leads to innovation. So I think these are really two very closely related.
Probably should be having questions and interaction as we go along.
Well, I think it's a lot of interesting, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of good minds in here, so feel free to.
So one of the things that is interesting to me about both these questions is really it forces us into a mindset of humility, kind of an intellectual humility. I'm not saying I know the answer to that solution, but maybe I'm still trying to investigate the question.
Definitely, and I think for the public policy issues that I work on in the environmental space, sustainability space, community development space, just defining the problem. I mean, they are really wicked problems, as I think Dr. Chatterjee used that term earlier. You know, they're very hard to define. And, you know, I would just say one thing also that I've learned from the IDEO work that I've done and the engagement we've done with them is getting outside the building. I mean, I think that's one lesson that maybe could be actionable here, even though we do a lot of iteration and a lot of experimentation. But taking that even a step further and going outside the building, you know, when I go to Penjaringan in North Jakarta, which is a low-income kind of ad hoc, some would say slum community, and you start talking with people one-on-one in their homes and observing how they're using your app or struggling to use your app, I mean, you're going to learn more in that hour you spend with the person than you know. I mean, the lecture stuff is important. I don't want to count it out because I certainly benefited from it, but you know, getting outside the building to experiment further is great.
So to add to that, I had mixed background of academia as well as in industry. So I find it's interesting that how both these entities handle problem solving in a very different way. Like in academia, I see that we learn things, we'll have knowledge, then try to desperately search a problem. Like, where can I apply this? This is what I'm to research on. What is the question? You know, in the industry, when I was in the industry, it's just the opposite. We say, here's a problem, how can you solve it? You know, so we are coming from two different angles. I think there is an opportunity to converge them together, and that itself might bring the academia and industry together in more common path. I think there is separation of approach, and I think more realize that, implement those in academic programs, industry programs, we can collaborate better and converge in a more common, meaningful way.
I think that's a great point. And part of why I am here, coming from industry into academia, is that one of the things we learned when I was at Fidelity is I spent a lot of time at Stanford at the D School, and that the problems we worked on a lot and had that we gained enormously by putting them in front of a set of fresh eyes, and especially at a place where there was an interdisciplinary program. So at the Stanford D School, there would be students from the business school, the law school, the medical school, the engineering school, and we would give them problems like, how do you help people plan for dying? How do you know, tough problems like that, and how do you get people to communicate? And ones that we thought we kind of knew the answer to, and we would get more depth. And you know, the expression that comes from IDEO and design thinking is that innovation comes from problem finding problem solving. And so, but sometimes new eyes see the problem differently than experienced eyes. And so there's a way that industry benefits from the academic and the student approach and vice versa.
I want to bring this question probably a little bit to you, Fred, because you're doing this in this college here, but open to everyone. And my concern is that I've spent a lot of time on design thinking, not only in this university, I also do that regularly now at USC. And it's a collaborative team building exercise. And if you look at Ideolab, the reason they're so successful is that their team brings in different disciplinary perspective. There's an MBA, there's a psychologist, there's a computer scientist, and engineer. Unfortunately, academia is still siloed. These are all ISIT students. The Drucker School is not talking to us. We're not talking to the psychology school. And in that context, do you think that the student that comes to Hive or the student comes here, is everybody okay to get this? Or is there a particular mindset of students that actually gets this interdisciplinary approach? And there is a mindset of students who are very siloed and they will never get it. Is that something challenge you face? Because I see that.
I mean, I think it's a great question. I think that's the irony of education and liberal arts education is that it's being done in silos. And that is the justification and a lot of the mindset that we bring to our work at the Hive and why this is such a perfect place to do it, because between the 5 undergraduate colleges and the 2 graduate schools, there's just a richness of people. So on the projects, in the class that I teach on human-centered design, we have students, undergraduate students from all 5 colleges, and we're able to create project teams that have students from all 5 colleges, and teams of 5. We have several instances of this where teams of 5, and there's a business student from Claremont McKenna, there's a biology student from Pomona, there's an engineer from Harvey Mudd, there's a philosophy student from Pitzer, there's a literature student from Scripps. Not that that's all they do in each of those schools, and they are absolutely learn to be more interested in the perspectives that each other bring to the problem. So I think the earlier the better. The more used to the walls that we live within, the more, the stronger they become. That's why I love doing this at an undergraduate level, but it doesn't mean people can't be saved in grad school or saved in industry and business and brought to see other perspectives. But
How many of you watched Big Bang Theory?
Yeah.
Yeah, you watched it, right? So I just recent episode, Chris Story, Shelton is a physicist, and Shelton just absolutely disrespect for geographers. So there's a scientist there. Then the geographers, when they approach the problem, actually very interesting and need Shelton's skills. Shelton just doesn't want to be with him because of disciplinary boundary, but he would love the problem. So he sneaked in and worked on the project. So that means, again, so I think just like you said, bring problem to them, give them a say, then when people will be drawing the problem, then they will solve it. So as long as we break that wall and get them involved.
And that puts us at the forefront of comedy.
Which I love Big Bang Theory.
If you want to, see more of Sheldon, watch Young Sheldon.
Matt, do you want to?
Actually, I think we have a question in the back.
Oh, sure.
So one of the things that is actually interesting about getting together like this is we're talking about trying to find problems that we can try to solve. When really maybe we should try to switch it and make it more like an urgent care for people that have problems they need to have solved. They have things up in San Francisco and other cities that were Amazon Web Services called pop-ups. You have an idea, you want to start a small business, you can walk in and say, how would I do this with your technology? I don't know of anything like that exists, where we can come in and say, have 3 people to say, well, we thought of this idea, but we have no idea how to make it work. And wouldn't it be kind of cool to have an urgent care facility for idea generation?
Definitely. I mean, let me just say that I first want to give a lot of credit to CISAT and to the Advanced GIS Lab because they kind of are that way. As a social scientist, they welcomed me and they let me, basically live there for a year. I think that I'm going to say something a little odd as a CGU graduate. I really enjoyed the TNDY class. I know from talking with other people that a lot of people, when I've said that to some friends of mine here, the program, they kind of roll their eyes at me, but I thought it was great. I think it gets to all these issues, but I mean, if you're really asking from a nuts and bolts perspective, how do we improve this, and I think this is deeply linked to innovation, is you have to make it required, right? We're all so busy mastering the material in our disciplines and the tools and all that stuff. Again, there's nobody who's still going through everyone here is like at least offended, right? I mean, I think a TNDY lab that goes along with it as a second semester would kind of pick up on some of the comments that people have made from the audience and force graduate students to work together on a specific problem. I think that would be hugely powerful tool. So just think about it, but don't blame me if anyone gets mad.
And I think I would echo the strength of more adoption of a transdisciplinary approach here. I know that I teach down at San Diego State, and with my particular undergrads that I teach, I do specifically look at what are declared majors and try to mix it up with folks. One of the classes that I teach, it's not just information systems. I've got psych folks in there. I've got communications major, econ folks. And when we break into project teams, I specifically look to break them up, because otherwise there is nothing compelling them to go beyond major, right? And it is just such a wonderful thing you see when you have individuals of unlike backgrounds, unlike passions come together and really often use technologies to bring it all together.
And there's a lot of learning that way, I think, too.
There is. Absolutely.
We're okay. We're okay. Let's switch to just a little bit. It's related. All these questions are a bit related. Let's switch a little bit to this next topic. How should academics approach helping those harmed by technological innovation? How should we innovate social welfare policy and practices so they provide sustainable assistance to those displaced by automation and helping people learn new skills in the face of new technology? Clearly, it's a transdisciplinary kind of question.
Might be a bit much for 7:45. I could kick this off because I generated this question. I mean, I think that, from a policy perspective, that this is something important to think about. I don't have a crisp, nice, clean answer, and but I welcome ideas from the hive mind. I think again that just posing the question to technologists, to people in MIS programs and computer engineering programs is a powerful first step. But I think, innovation means different things to different people, and it affects people differently. And I think one of the, most powerful, humbling lessons from the last presidential election and from looking at how people in the US and around the world have reacted to globalization is to understand that the economists were wrong, right? Because a vast majority, an overwhelming majority of economists, when you surveyed them and you looked at the models and the quantitative data, they would say, should we globalize, should we open to free trade? And they said, yes, it lifts all boats and it causes general welfare gains, large, unimpeachable general welfare gains for a nation. When you look in a more targeted way, perhaps empowered by GIS, at a community-based level, you're going to see that there's winners and losers. And there's geographic, there's social, there's educational, there's economic reasons why this happens. To me, when I look at what's happened with the UK, the United States, other major developing and industrialized nations, I really see a lot of that as linked to globalization and to the impacts of globalization. Well, automation is going to replicate that pattern, but I think it's going to be even stronger. While I was thinking about this question a little bit over the last few days, I pulled in a few articles. There's a McKinsey report that came out, I think, earlier this year, and it said something like, half of all jobs could be automated in the next 20 to 40 years, right? And so, including teaching, including a lot of research, right? No, moderating takes art. moderating takes time. But I mean, really, so much of the work we do in research and in creating lit reviews, I mean, that would be something I'd be happy to farm out to computers. But so again, just like, let's at least put the question out there as something to consider, even though we might not be social scientists or people involved in that field. I think from the technical perspective, it's really important because there are interesting things we can do. You know, it's around education and I mean, obviously, you know, many companies have floated different ideas. I mean, Google, I know, is investing large amounts of money in training, and you know, Apple's trying to do the same thing. But I do wonder whether those efforts will be enough if, you know, a fraction of what is predicted comes to pass. So I think that the learning about learning and teaching people remotely and teaching people through design science, I mean, I think those could be powerful tools to help bring people up to speed and share the benefits of automation and globalization.
There is another interesting perspective on that, which is that people tend to come here from other places, but we don't tend to go there. So if the jobs are there, why aren't people moving that way? They're rooted here. So it may be a different kind of education to say, no, this isn't the only place in the world. There are opportunities in other places. I think that, you know, sort of re-acceleration of immigration in different ways could be a really important thing. So, you know, I agree with you, and maybe there are even other ways to think about it.
You know, as an eternal optimist, I will say that for every one job that will disappear due to automation or AI, there'll be 5 new jobs created. The challenge is we don't know which new 5 jobs, right? And I think this fear has always been around. When computing first came, banking said, oh, there'll be no banks, no tellers, nothing. When ATMs came, oh, no one will ever work in a bank. I think we have more people employed in banks today than during those times, right? So it'll be interesting. But going back to the globalization thing, Nick, that you said, you know, I really think, and I've seen enough data on this, globalization in the last 20 years has pulled more people from lower economic status to middle class and higher ends. There is no doubt about that. And wherever this country and UK is heading, I think they're heading in the wrong direction. I don't want to make this a political comment, but I'm sorry. I mean, we are making some serious mistakes right now.
Yeah, I'll just add one thought to that, which I agree with you, but it gets a little bit back to how we're training people, and so it's the puzzles versus the quilts, and so the jobs are in creativity, they are not in things that can be automated, and that trend will not change. I mean, there are jobs that, and for the most part, that will accelerate into teaching and medicine and all kinds of places. I would also say, though, that the human-centeredness that we talk about has to have an ethical side to it also. So it's not just what's good for some people, but what's good for more people, and to shift our thought into broader populations and lead, and that can come from institutions like this one, lead with what are the ethical things that we should be doing for broader sets of people.
Yeah, I think it's a very serious question, and I think the problem is also very serious. We can see that technology automation does create newer jobs, you know, makes us progress more, solve problems, we get better health, better education, better technology, we live longer. So we see all these benefits. At the same time, automation and progress in technology, we cannot deny that it changes the skill set hierarchy completely in the society. And we can say, well, it happened centuries. You know, when computers came in bank, a new generation employees were required to take on those jobs, and people who did not survive in the computer world, they perished. So kind of survival of the fittest. But there's, I think, social ethical issue here, which I don't think we are able to solve. If most jobs move to Silicon Valley or Washington, DC, or in Austin, on those hot spots, or there are only certain spots of job growth, which we know in the last 8 years, there had been quite a bit of reduction of unemployment rate. That means new jobs have been created. Okay, yet we had seen many patches of the country who did not see the benefit. They did not get the job. They still been unemployed. So I think it's a huge societal problem, and that is kind of accelerated by the technology and all this progress that we make. And I don't think there's a straightforward solution to that. We live longer. We cannot just say, well, you are not fit for this job anymore in new century or new era. We cannot say that. I think we have people, father, grandfather, and uncles who live in area who just don't fit the skill requirement of that newer job creation, new job category requires. So what do we do? I mean, they need to live a life too. So what is this? Are we, for example, like we are having new energy jobs, solar energy and other energy jobs in Colorado and other areas, right? So how do we create jobs in a population or a geographic area where such opportunities are not there? Should we just say them, well, sorry, you don't have skills, you're unemployed, go figure out being social, dollars. So I think it's a serious problem this brings out. I don't even see a clear solution in the future on this.
And it's even more interesting as we discuss that here in California, because I just read a report the other day that was kind of, I don't want to say on the other side of the spectrum of this, but at the same time was kind of presented a very unique opportunity for us to help better a number of folks. And that's the fact that we're starting to develop a severe shortage of tradesmen. There's starting to be a very much a shortage of tradesmen. And so, I know that when we talk about traditional, academia, we don't include tradesmen into that. But maybe there's something in the days ahead where we need to start figuring out a way to educate a tradesman workforce to be the smart tradesman. And because this is one of those things that we're seeing a huge problem coming up in this space, and I think that there's potential opportunities there for us to make some real difference. So I thought I saw a hand in the back there. Is this gentleman?
Hi.
Hi.
For everybody that I haven't met yet, my name is Andy Vasco, and I'm the director of the Transdisciplinary Studies program. So I wanted to chime in as that voice really quickly, but it specifically applies to this issue, I think, in a way that hasn't been addressed yet. So firstly, just as a quick scale introduction of the way CGU works with transdisciplinarity, we require all doctoral students to take a transdisciplinary course. We are the only school in the entire world that does that. That is quite unusual that we have that, and there's certainly further to go. What is an important thing that we haven't talked about yet with how transdisciplinarity overlaps with these types of issues is that there's quite a bit of overlap with design thinking, there's quite a bit of overlap in applied research. The third area where transdisciplinarity really focuses on is systems thinking. And in the world of systems thinking, you aren't looking at how did I screw up? You're looking at how can I not have unintended consequences that'll be really harmful for my decisions by looking at all of the ways my decision will be interconnected with the rest of the world. That's why we need that collaboration. That's why we need to work with people from other disciplines. And so while you will do things that have unintended consequences always, one of the ideas is on the front end, it's worth bringing in people, even if you don't anticipate any problems, to think through these things. And so, yes, technology will continue. There will be displacement of jobs. But there are ways to ameliorate and to lessen some of the negative impacts as a continuously iterative process, as long as we're continuously looking at this in a systems level as well.
Can I just say one other quick thing, which is thank you for those comments and thanks for the work you do with the TNDY program. The one other thing I would just say is I think also that in the policy space and the government space, that we as people who practice design thinking and are trained in it can also bring a lot of benefit to government and to nonprofits and to agencies, because one thing that spurred my interest in this is that the programs that we do have in the United States are not at the scale. They're not effective enough. So the work we do at the graduate level with evaluation, with systems thinking, with transdisciplinarity, but also with bringing those ideas to government and trying new things, I think is really critical. So there's no clear answer, but I think that's certainly a good way forward.
One comment I think that answer, tying back exactly what you just said, is ties into your chart, Terry, which is the actually goes back to the title of your panel, which is disruptive innovation, which kind of takes question 2 and question 3. Disruption has impacts, positive and negative. And I think it's what you just brought up, which is, and I think Samir and I have talked about this too, the design science, that approach is helping organizations and communities deal with this change from the industrial economy to the information economy, because there's different models to play with. And organizations are struggling to how to deal with it. So go back to your question, Terry, which is how do you help out these people with changes?
Next question.
What's that?
That's the next question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I was on 2 and 3.
Our question.
Well, for example, if you looked in China recently, the last couple of weeks or so, you know, the PRC has come out saying we're going to have a 20 or 30% efficiency reduction or improvements in our country by 2020, whatever it is, or 2030. They're already baking in some of those improvements. So what I'm highlighting that to be is society, at a social level, even or the company level. I think how academia and when you graduate the students here, and like Lauren was talking about with design science, your focus here, that actually is critical to help this bridge, and you deal with this every day with your customers. This mindset you guys have here is unique, and it's actually helping out people that are struggling, grappling with it. And there's a lot of disruption going on. And it's kind of also defining what's the boundaries of what is IT. You know, we have the Ben Bazant's a mud thing. When I came here, I kind of saw where it was going where IT and OT were merging together. You have the commercial market, you have the enterprise market. You deal with it all the time in your ecosystem. Then you have heavy industrials. And now those are kind of clashing together. And there's a whole bunch of disruption. But I think design science or design thinking, in addition to systems thinking, which you brought up, helps society, helps the organization saying, how do I be more competitive? How do I apply some of these technologies? Because I think everybody's dedicated to improve things, but their mindsets aren't quite there yet. Does that make sense? So they get fatalistic saying, I'm gonna be out of a job, or I'm toast, I can't program a computer. And you have other people marching forward, and I think there's that middle ground. And I think a lot of our graduates are gonna be stuck in organizations they're saying, that don't know about design science yet, don't know about IDEO. And that's the solutions they need so they can apply their energies to do that next step. Because you deal with also transformations inside especially in the public sector. You know, I know you can probably comment more on that too, but I think that's one of the strengths where academia, our graduates, our research can help people that are caught in this industrial informational transition phase. And going back to what Terry was saying is, how do you're displacing people, but these people, they want to work hard and figure it out, but they just don't have that model yet. Does that make sense? I mean, you and I've talked about this before.
I mean, one big challenge with design thinking, I'll just say, as someone who writes a lot of grant applications, is Q1, we're going to do some user assessments, and Q2, we're going to figure out Qs 3 and 4. That often doesn't really fly. So design thinking can be a challenge to pitch, to sell to, in our case, foundations, NGOs, other groups. So it's not a cure-all, but I think it is a powerful thing.
But I'll just make
How do you deal with this at Fidelity? Right?
well, I mean, one of the things, you have to separate parts of an organization. At Fidelity, there's the performance engine that is, people don't want you to experiment with their money or their health. At the same time, if you're going to innovate, you have to carve off a piece of your organization that is willing to play by different rules and take risks and try things. So one of the things we said, this is another design thinking phrase, but the cost of planning now exceeds the cost of experimentation. And so you need to set yourself up to consciously experiment and try things. And back to Andy's point, also to think about how do you understand and how do you look for and experiment around unintended consequences and expect to be wrong rather than expect to be right. And how do you do that? And it is, and fundamentally, our current legislative process is broken because it is not that. It is craft, argue, 49% to 51%, and we lose sight of figuring out if we are meeting the need, if we're solving the problem. And so I think there's room to do that. And what if you could legislate through experimentation? If you could test a healthcare policy before you implemented one and could try things, right, and do pilot projects.
You know, the Finnish government has a department of experimentation in the Prime Minister's or President's office, and they're doing 27 different experiments, including basic income, exactly, in a small place like that, it's a little easier to organize.
Yeah, in a world that is increasingly complex, then you need I love that, a department of experimentation. It doesn't mean things can't be figured out, but things should be tried.
Sounds like a new transdisciplinary class to me.
But I think what you're seeing is, and I think DSR, health systems, DSR, it's getting aligned. Because the other part is also we're trying to free up, going back to like KRC, we're trying to step up where they're going, and we talk about AI. It's freeing innovation within your organizations for people to be creative like your Hive is doing. So it's bringing in where, I mean, obviously, if you look to Silicon Valley, there's no hardware, it's working off the cloud now. I mean, all your startups, I mean, a lot of them just have, it's all cloud-based, and it's just it's no large servers or infrastructures anymore. But what I've noticed is they're trying to free up their human capital to be creative. Does that make sense? And I mean, that's what I'm kind of seeing. And CDSR is where people that has a nice niche to kind of get the organization and societies and get that freed up. So I think it's allowing that creativity and innovation to happen and be part of that disruption and part of that activity. And so anyway, that's what I think the ecosystems that you deal with or a creative environment that Warren was talking about, that we're just unlocking some of that right now. We talk about Silicon Valley having it, it's also taking your talent you've hired. If you spend $100K or $200K to recruit some folks, you bring them into an organization.
That's one person, by the way.
What's that?
That's one person.
Whatever, I know you're creating, you hire some people, but then it's releasing that and getting that into the right framework in terms of the risk management posture. You talked about new cash flow, current cash flow, new business experimentation. That's also getting kind of hybrid, especially on the software side, where you get these companies are coming and going every 18 months. If you don't hit some of those targets in Silicon Valley, it's moving pretty fast. So that failure rate that you're talking about is very much accelerated. So we're challenged is freeing up some of the younger kids we're bringing in to have some of those good ideas and letting that kind of, what's the tool to allow that creativity blossom in your organization or your communities or anything else? And I think you guys deal with that all the time also.
To me, it's covered around the notion that there's a difference between technology solving a problem and technology helping a person solve a problem. And that becomes a fine line that needs to be taught, because a lot of people jump into the former rather than the latter, and they actually have the reverse.
And the other thing that comes back to the maps, which I love, is helping people see problems that they hadn't seen before. So that's where your visualizations. The maps are beautiful. That map about in South Carolina is a perfect example. You don't see that problem until you look at it from a different perspective.
Exactly, and that's the latter. It's technology enhancing a person's ability, because ultimately that map in the hands of policymakers, not a business person, is going to make the transformation. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is that place-based funding is a mechanism of government to solve problems, but it's usually gone to the wrong place. And it's exactly what you were saying about this question is actually the perfect question, because it causes you to pause and say, should I solve this problem? Imagine if the Trinity project, they actually said, well, no, we're not going to solve that problem. And I remember that being a debate, and hearing that it was a debate and going forward, but they ultimately moved forward. I think just by you considering this question, causing that pause moment before a project or a design goes to build is the essence of what academia can do, is introduce, are we going to be better off with the solution to this problem than we were in the problem itself?
A few years back, I was invited to attend a meeting at National Science Foundation because the SCISE program directorate was planning to start a new funding program for creativity and design. And Alfred Spector, who is a student of Herb Simon, the godfather of design, he made a remarkable comment. He said, academia does not accept failure. And that is the biggest problem, because you cannot be a true entrepreneurial inventor if you don't fail. And I think that academia is the best place to fail because it doesn't hurt too many people. But if you're out there in the real world and you fail, it affects too many people. So somewhere in our publishing system, somewhere in our journal boards, and somewhere in this whole meritorious ways of promoting people, we have lost the fact of failure is part of the game. And I keep telling my students that, in the lab, if it doesn't work, fine. Let's learn. Let's learn why it didn't work, right? And get better at it. But there's a reward system that is lacking in the academic world, actually.
Well, or it has to be revised.
Yeah.
I just want to echo that. That's one thing I learned from PhD program actually from my advisor in knowing knowledge discovery. He always say, because we are learning writing academic journals, right, qualitatively you have to be P significant for that results. Or you start a dissertation, you say the solution has to work, has to be able to improve what I intended to do. My advisor always told me, but why? Because even it didn't work, you still add to the knowledge base. Tell future people, say, don't go this way. I tried, it didn't work. You go other ways. So he always tells me that. So he said, it doesn't mean you do a dissertation. Your solution has to be approved. You achieve your goal. If you didn't achieve, it's still a great dissertation. You try a new way. So that's what innovation.
I think I just say one other thing, which is I think there's actually something to take home and to use as a teaching tool, which is from the public policy perspective, it is very hard to experiment with stuff without consequences, without serious consequences. But when we do computational modeling of social systems and built systems and how they interact, then we can do some cool stuff. I did agent-based modeling as part of my dissertation work. It goes very well with GIS. And you're increasingly doing more. I know the platform is to integrate it. That can be a very powerful way to iterate, to fail, a million times, and not to kill anyone while you're doing it. So that's fail but don't hurt anyone, right?
Well, can I make a couple of comments here? So I work for a Boeing company, and one of the things that I worked on last year was automating the fuselage build. And if you know what the fuselage build look like, is the huge fuselage, and you're trying to put that together with several sections coming in, and with rivets you put them together, and it takes a lot of heavy muscle power to put that together. And people who build like linebackers and linemen in football, they only last about 3 to 6 months, and then you have to replace them. And so the robotics is going there. So it's an automation system we're trying to put together at Boeing. And so what the Professor Samir talked about was that, hey, when we try to do the automation, then you're going to create more jobs than less, because, we're putting a lot of people together to make that thing work. And, rather than having, several, mechanics just drilling holes and putting rivets on the fuselage, right? And so it is true in that do that. But my point, what I'm trying to say is that even though that does that, we are going to have these problems. The mechanics who are drilling, they're going to be out of work. And in fact, this morning I was talking to my uncle, who's not an engineer altogether, and we were talking about something else. And we got to the topic of, okay, there's self-driving cars, because somebody was cutting him right in front of me when I was talking to him. And he says, what about all the truck drivers who's driving right now? In about 15, 20 years, they're going to be out of work. So if they're out of work, then what can somebody do? And Nick's question of this was great. It's like, so how can we as an engineer, we don't even think about that, right? As a CEO, we think about, okay, we don't want people getting hurt, because that's a lot of money that we're gonna have to pay for workers' comp and all that kind of stuff. So we put automation. But as a social point, as an engineer, we don't talk about, okay, it's great to have self-driving cars and self-driving trucks. We have a whole industry, from motels to casinos to truck stops that cater to truckers. And it's not only the truckers that's going to be out of business, it's going to be the casinos, the motels, the truck stop diners or whatever. They're all going to be out of business. So how is this going to help them, or what do they have to do to do for them? I think this is a very serious question. And I don't know, if we could answer that, I think that would be great.
The good news is if you can map and model it, you're one step ahead. So the people in this room will be okay. But
we could always do modeling and simulation, right? I mean, that's one thing good about academic is that we could always do modeling and say what if basis, right? It doesn't cost as much, but you know, as an engineer, I wouldn't think about, hey, what about, you know, I just want to get the you know, self-driving cars to work without bumping into anybody, right? But what about all those taxi drivers and the truckers and all this kind of stuff? I don't think about that, but this is a great question.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because I really appreciated that you started off with a slide that said, love the problem, not the solution. Thank you.
That was my fellow panelists, by the way,
well,
so thank you.
No, but I work for a nonprofit. We do a lot with environmental justice and water resources in Los Angeles. And, you know, the data is really clear where the problems are. Finding students who are willing to love those problems is really hard. And finding students that can, or finding anybody to love those problems. You know, so you talk about the self-driving cars, we still have the unintended consequences of the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, right? We have, I mean, in this area, we don't have to go to Jakarta, we don't have to go anywhere, you know, in this area we have 4.2 million people living with high pollution burdens that are as bad as any place else in the world. So I'm not quite sure how we move from you know, not finding problems to, you know, in my view, there are more problems than could possibly be solved by all the universities. But it's really hard to get students to engage with problems that they have a really hard time understanding.
I mean, I think if you can put those problems in front of students, certainly at a place like this, I mean, I know that there were people involved with some nonprofits here when I was studying, but I mean, and then maybe the other solution is to get students from those communities educated enough to come to a place like this or a similar institution and to take them on. Because I used to work for Pacific Institute during water policy stuff, so I certainly feel your interest in that and think it's critically important. The EJ stuff is so important. It's so easy to, even for environmentalists, to not think about that stuff. So thanks for bringing it forward.
Let's have this be the last question, I think, since we've been going an hour.
Just one comment regarding the students, not finding the students. I'm also teaching part-time at Cal State LA, and I originally came from utility industry. When I started the PhD program, I was very interested in all the problems within the energy domain. And when I came here, I didn't know much about GIS. I didn't know about design science. But you know, as we said, yeah, it was great opportunity for me to learn about all these tools and how we can use them. And I managed to work on very interesting projects here. And I also, you know, kind of engaged many of my classmates, of course, you know, with the help of faculty to work on these, and they were very engaged as well and interested. So I think the key is making students buy into those problems, which is not an easy thing. It's not just in the class time. I remember, you know, been spending talking about those problems, talking about the industry, why these are gonna make, these are big deal problem. In general, I think the buy-in from students, that was the key, you know, to help get them engaged and help them interested and help them do the work. And certainly the same thing for me. The faculty managed to do that. Same thing for me. Thanks.
It's nice to see the ISNT is embracing the concept of grand challenges that have been in academia and in industry, where you can also get the crowdsourcing, where you can get a design team online and crank stuff out. I think the grand challenge, again, answering your question, how do people embrace some of these problems? I think grand challenges is one vehicle that's finally been embraced by ISNT, that's been used in other communities like DARPA and SF and things that kind of get people around some of the problems you were bringing up. You know, you can kind of get your nonprofit, you get a coalition of the
No, we are looking for problems. I mean, the one thing I would add to that is to humanize some of these problems. And so sometimes we look at problems and they're so big they're overwhelming. And maybe it's not that they're not challenging enough, they're just overwhelming and you don't see how you can make a difference, especially environmental issues. But to try to humanize those problems so that if you're solving the problem for a person, you're likely solving it for many people like that person. And to think about what's the need of the truck stop owner. That's a really interesting one. But in environmental issues also. So I think some of it is storytelling and humanizing and making the problems, and that's another place where we can help as academics or educators, is to help people figure out ways to spend longer understanding where the people are at the end of wicked problems and other problems and take longer to think through what the people inside of those problems are needing.
Can we thank our panel for their